Hello, and thanks for joining me for another installment of Being Stoic, where I'm going chapter by chapter through the Discourses by Epictetus. And we are up to chapter 27 of Book 1. And this chapter is called, the title is On the Ways in Which Impressions Come to Us and the Aids We Must Provide Ourselves to Deal with Them. So this discourse is really all around, the impressions, and then some tools that we need to use because, a lot of times we can get wrong impressions. And so Epictetus talks about, it's the duty of every true philosopher or any person who's, seeking to live a good life to be able to learn how to address impressions and determine if it's a false impression or not. And so Epictetus talks about 4 different ways that impressions come to us. The first one is either things are and they seem like they are to us. The next one is things are not and they seem not so to us as well. Then the third one is things are, but they don't seem like they are to us. And then the fourth way is things are not, and yet they seem to us like they are. So, these are the kind of 4 different ways. Some of which there's really only one of those that would be correct, and that is the things are. And they also seem so to us. So the other 3 are, I guess, would be an error. He talks about there's 3 main hindrances to forming correct impressions. The first one is fallacies, which is incorrect information or incorrect reasoning. Using your logic, if you come to an incorrect conclusion based on logical fallacies or wrong information that you've received somewhere, that would be one way. Another way, he talks about plausibility of circumstances, meaning just the circumstances that the situation or we find ourselves in seems like to us. It just seems plausible. It seems correct to us, just given the environment. And then the third way is habit. Habits, I think this one, I would love to talk about this one a little more in depth, but just given time, we'll save it for another discourse. But habit, where a lot of habit is formed, for example, around food is an example I have, where food is a habit that's, unthinking. So these would be like assumptions related to food or related to other things that are can lead us astray in, what's actually correct. So the tools he mentions to use against these 3 is for fallacies. Of course, we use our logic and we use our reason. For plausibility of circumstances, he talks about primary conceptions, and there was another discourse about primary conceptions in an earlier chapter that I will link to in the details below, so I won't go into it here. But the short version is primary concepts is, to me, basically like what's an ultimate, kind of like a truth, like justice, good, evil, beauty. Primary concepts. That's kind of my takeaway from that. Then the third one for habit is to act contrary to habit. So if you have something you recognize as a habit for you, the way around that is to step out of that habit. Then, for example, don't perform that behavior or think that way. Think a different way, and just to counteract a habitual action or habitual thinking. So the example that Epictetus uses is death. And he talks about death being, death is a very kind of recurring theme in Stoic thought, I've discovered. And death is an impression he talks about in this discourse, is that death is an evil. It's an evil thing. And yet he would argue, that it's a necessary thing. He uses a quote actually from the Iliad, from Sarpedon. The quote I thought was pretty cool, so I'll just read it out. It says, "But 1,000 fates of death stand over us, which mortal men may not flee from nor avoid. Then let us on and give glory or obtain it for ourselves." This is Sarpedon from the Iliad by Homer, and it actually gives the reference and page number for the edition that was used for the translation. But yeah, but 1,000 fates of death stand over us. So Epictetus argues, that everybody dies. Well, all living things die. And there's 1,000 ways that are standing over us that will cause us to die eventually. And so death is not an evil. It is a necessary thing because it's unchangeable. It's not, you're not able to change it. He does talk about, you change things where you can, but ultimately at the end of it all, there will be death. So death, the impression of death as an evil is an incorrect impression, Epictetus would say. I would like to use another example that I've thought about, and that is an example. Okay, so this is a thought exercise, so just bear with me. So let's pretend that you are taken, you're blindfolded, you're taken, and you're dropped in a neighborhood that you don't know where this neighborhood is, or you've been put on a plane, let's say. So you don't even, it's not in your immediate city. So you're put on a plane and you're dropped in a neighborhood, and you are placed at the corner of a house. And so your view is down this side of the house and then down this side of the house, at a right angle. And you're asked then to tell someone what your impressions are. Your mind will immediately start making impressions about the house, about who might live there, about what the people might be like that lives there, because you're going to be taking in the environment around you and forming impressions of that house, and you're going to be forming impressions about the occupants of that house. And then, you can only see down two sides of this house. Then the person who's taken you there, let's say, asks you what is on the other two sides? What is the house like in the areas that you can't see? And for example, I just said, what are the other two sides like? So my impression might be that it's a box. That there are only two other sides to that house, that the house is a square, but that's not necessarily true, is it? But my mind might go to that like assumption or that impression, or my impression might be given from the way the house looked, and I can gaze maybe at the neighboring houses. I might think, okay, there's a swimming pool back there probably, or it's likely, or maybe it's some other thing. But all of these things you can't see back there, so you're just forming opinions based on your impressions. And this is a lot of what bias, when bias comes in, your biases that you have, your preconceived notions, this would be habitual thinking that I mentioned earlier, because biases are usually, it could be any of these other three things too, but let's just say habitual thinking, that you have habitually thought of houses that you form this impression, are associated with certain types of people. And so, but that habitual thinking, that bias might stand in your way of actually forming correct impression. And then it would be really interesting then to come back later, actually meet the people who live there and find out about their lives, and find out how right you were, and then to walk around the house and see how well how true your impressions really were, and how much you were being affected by the biases like habit. The plausibility of circumstances, like the circumstances that you find yourself in, or you find the house in, could it be leading you, into error, or fallacies of some kind, like you've gotten wrong information about a certain type of house, or somehow you're using some sort of logical fallacy that's leading you astray. So I hope that made sense. I thought that this chat about impressions was really interesting. There's a lot that we could discuss about it further. I think especially around the the areas that lead us astray, plus those tools. Primary concepts is one of those things that I'm still learning about with Stoicism, and I get the feeling that there's probably more to it than I've been able to understand so far, so I'm hoping that as I continue to read other Stoic works, that primary concepts maybe become a little more clear to me too. So I think I'll stop with that. The next chapter will be we're getting very close to the end of Book 1, but we will be on chapter 28, and the title of that is That We Must Not Be Angry with Men, and concerning what things are small and what are great among men. That we must not be angry with men. That should be a good one. So I'll read up on this discourse and have a chat about it coming up fairly soon. So until then, take care.